and so it is. Alrighty, well, good morning, everyone. We're going to pick up today with some things that we've been working on since the beginning of the year, with kind of a new and different twist, or a deeper twist to them, a deeper exploration of them. The title is All I Really Know Is I Don't Know Nothing. I don't know nothing. And the tie-in to that is from the Beatitudes. It is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So we're gonna draw today a little bit from Emmett Fox, from his chapter on the Beatitudes in his book on the Sermon of the Mount. There's just two Beatitudes that we're working with today. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And the two of those are closely related. So the first thing we want to talk about, a little bit about Emmett Fox and the Beatitudes. Emmett Fox wrote a book, The Sermon on the Mount, which is his interpretation of Matthews 5, 6, and 7, which is the New Testament, from the New Testament. And it is what many scholars believe is kind of a succinct summary of what Jesus taught when he was here. So this would be the teachings of Jesus rather than the teachings about Jesus. And we have to remember that in that day and time, as well as 500 years earlier when the Buddha was here, many people did not read or write, and if they did did not have a lot of printed material available to them. This is why the sacred scrolls were so valuable, and the scribes who recorded them, had to be so careful. So the teachers of those days, they tried to speak in a form of speech that was easily recognized. It had rhyme to it. It had alliteration to it. It was something catchy that people could remember and they could take away. We get a lot of that today with memes on the internet. Self-help psychology books constantly giving us these little slogans. If it's going to be, it's up to me. Right? Little catchy little one-liner that we can remember. We can put it on an index card. We can stick it up to our desk, to our computer screen. So the teachers of those days tried to speak in a way that people would remember, in a way that they could take the teaching away with them in a very succinct format. So we get the Eightfold Path of Buddhism, just 8 things to remember. We get the 10 Commandments of Moses, and we get the Beatitudes from Jesus. So we can kind of take these little summations, and if people could take them and remember them and just work with those through the course of their lifetime, they would continue to extrapolate the deeper meaning behind them. So Emmett Fox came to this country. He was born in Ireland, and he worked as the advance man for Thomas Troward. And the advance man would go out and rent the hall, put the advertisements in the newspaper, print up the tickets, sell the tickets, and do all those things to get everything ready for Troward to come and do his lectures. And many people had difficulty with Troward's language, with understanding him. He was a judge, trained as a lawyer and a judge, and he spoke in very, very laborious terms of logic. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, and if we have this major premise and this minor premise, and so on. And Emmett Fox said, I really want to take this message and make it more accessible to people. I want to speak to people in a language they understand, to the ordinary person. And that was what kind of became his goal. And he became very, very popular. He went to New York and he started doing a Sunday service at the Hippodrome, which was a racetrack across the river in New Jersey. And he was drawing a crowd of 3,000 to 4,000 people on Sundays. But he was not a minister. He was not ordained by anybody. So he went to the Fillmores of Unity and he asked if they would ordain him as a Unity minister. And they said yes, but he had to go to Unity Village and complete the ministerial training with all the other candidates. And he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to leave his pulpit. So he went to the Brooks Sisters of Divine Science, and they ordained him as a Divine Science minister. So he became the minister of the First Church of Divine Science in New York City, which Ernest Holmes' brother Fenwick later became the pastor of after Emmett Fox had died. But Emmett Fox had kind of a very easy, very colloquial way of writing and of speaking, and he took the Beatitudes and he tried to give us his interpretation of them in a very easy manner, in a very simple way that we would understand. So we're going to draw from him today, and we're also going to draw from some of the teachings of Buddhism, particularly Zen Buddhism. So if you remember, we started in January, and I started with the question, what is your realization of God? Not your concept of God, your realization of God. Now, in previous years, you've heard us say, well, what's your concept? What is your concept of God? Excuse me. And this year we took it a little bit further. What is your realization? Excuse me while I get a drink of water. So we might want to just kind of explain the difference between concept and realization. Right? So the concept is our idea about something. And our idea about something is very important because what we believe to be true about something kind of directs our life, even if it's just at the physical or the psychological level. But when we couple that with the idea that there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief, and we think, well, our belief is really a deeply held opinion about something, a concept about something. See, then it becomes even more important for us. What is our concept of God? But the concept of God and all of the studying and all of the reading, all of the books and the tapes and all these things that we do in our education, spiritual education, we have to ask, well, what is that for? What is the purpose of that, see? Is it just to read more books? Is it just to listen to more talks? What is it? Why do we do this? So the other week, Lori and I were watching a movie, and this young man was going to, he lived in New York, and he was on his way to Yale. He was going to Yale for an interview to see if he could get accepted as a student. And on the train, he met this old priest. I just love the way the movie was written. I love watching screenplays and the way they do this. You know, the serendipity of these two characters coming together on a train. And of course, the priest has words of wisdom. He becomes like a mentor in the film. He appears over many years as this boy is riding the train back and forth to Yale. And somewhere in the course of the conversation, the priest says to him, you know, that he thinks the purpose of life is to prepare us to meet God face to face. Do we truly desire to meet God face to face? You know, and when he said that in the movie, I remembered that as a kid growing up. I remember being taught that as a small child, and it was terrifying to me as a child. See. Because the idea that I held of God at that time was this big man sitting on a throne in the sky, who, when we met God face to face, God was going to judge us for all of the things that we did wrong during this lifetime, and nobody wanted to undergo that. That wasn't a pleasant idea. Even at the age of 6 or 7, you know, you would say, well, this could turn out pretty bad, you know. Weren't looking forward to it. Excuse me. And I didn't have the concept at the time of God as this all-loving being, you know, that I have now. And when I heard this in the screenplay, you know, do you truly desire to meet God face to face? And I said, the realization of God, the experience of God, you see? This The difference between the concept and the realization is the concept is knowing about, but the realization is knowing, is knowing. So we come then to this very simple statement that was given to us a couple thousand years ago. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And what is this kingdom of heaven but the realization, the conscious experience of the realization of the presence of the divine in our lives, not at some faraway point in the future, not in a distant place called heaven, but here and now, to realize by experience the presence of the divine, the kingdom of heaven. To see God face to face, to put it into the words of the priest on the train, to see God face to face. And I think that's what our spiritual growth is really all about. That is what we are aiming towards if we are not already there. That is what we wished to experience. That is the desired outcome, if you can think of it that. And probably in simpler terms that is the direction that life is pushing us, whether we like it or not. That is where we are going. That is where we are headed. we can't stop the train. Where there's no brake we can get up and pull the handle on. We can only decide to cooperate or not cooperate. As I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, we can try to swim against the current, or we can go with the flow, you see. I was reading a book by a Hindu mystic, and it just kind of put things in perspective, Life took the minerals, the rock, the dust of the earth, and made it conscious of itself. What is your body? What is your physical body other than the dust of the earth? Taking the form of this beautiful body that we've been given to experience life and to express life here on earth, but somehow the rock became conscious of itself. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that absolutely amazing? And what the mystic sees in that is that the consciousness of the divine was always there from the beginning. It is imbued in the rock. It is imbued in the mineral. It is the energy that has become the matter. But it lay dormant as consciousness, as sentience. It lay dormant. But it continuously pushed forward through the process of evolution. It continually pushed matter forward into different forms, into higher life forms, until it got to a life form that was capable of awareness. And then it got to a life form that was capable of self-awareness. And in this self-awareness, we experience separation, the experience of separation. But life will continue to push us forward, ready or not, here we come. Life will continue to push us forward into an even higher consciousness, which the mystics call the supermind, or I would just call it the mystical experience. See? The kingdom of heaven, the experience of the kingdom of heaven. So the one thing we know about experiences is words just don't do them justice. To try to use a word to convey to someone what your experience of something is always falls short. It always falls short. The example we use in class is tasting chocolate. If you met someone who never had a piece of chocolate and you were going to explain to them what chocolate was like, the experience of chocolate, you couldn't do it. There are no words to do it. It is ineffable. It is ineffable. The only way for them to know what their experience of chocolate is to taste it. And even when they taste it, there's no guarantee that what their experience of chocolate is and what your experience of chocolate is are going to be the same. Because it's an experience. The realization of the taste of chocolate is in the tasting, is in the eating. So we started out, excuse me, the year by talking about actually the inadequacy of mind, of thought, of intellectual concepts to grasp and to understand that which we call God. Now the intellect can point us to it, but the intellect can't experience it because it's not an intellectual experience. There's no logic of Thomas Trower's logic that says A plus B and B, A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C, that's God. It can't happen, doesn't happen, you see. But nevertheless, it is an experience that we can have. So to be poor in spirit is to give up all of our preconceived notions about what God is, where God is, what our relationship to God is, what we have to do to experience the presence of God, and all those things. And what Fox tells us is that if we look back at the New Testament scriptures, it's obvious that many people of that time did not recognize Jesus for who he was and what he was. And he says, why do you think that is? And Emmett Fox's answer to his own question is, well, it's because people had a preconceived notion. They had a preconceived notion. Excuse me. They had a preconceived notion of what the, quote, Son of God was going to look like. And when Jesus didn't match that preconceived notion, they could not recognize him, could not see him for what the New Testament tells us he was. I think I mentioned to you one time when I worked in Hickory many years ago, the morning disc jockey used to kind of stir up stuff to get people talking about the radio program during the day. And one morning his question was, well, if you met Jesus walking down the street, would you know him? Would you be able to recognize him? And this was the topic of conversation in the break room that morning. And one sweet, sincere lady said, absolutely, she would. And somebody said, well, how would you know? And she says, well, his picture's right in the front of my Bible. That was her concept. That was her concept. Which means if Jesus appeared looking any other way, she would have missed him. She would have missed him. So this is what Emmett Fox is telling us, to be poor in spirit. So we want to recognize, first of all, the limitations of our own consciousness and our own intellect and our own thought processes. As wonderful as they are, as amazing as they can be. I mean, right now we're reading headlines about the telescope that's millions of miles out in space, that's going to start sending pictures back in about 6 months. We have spacecraft on the planet of Mars. We have a helicopter flying around on Mars. We build skyscrapers. We build ships that, cross the ocean in a couple days. We do all of these different things with the intellect. And yet the intellect is greatly limited. It's like when I used to work on TVs many years ago, back in the day when TVs had vacuum tubes and resistors and some transistors and things like that, And I had an oscilloscope, and I had a signal generator, and I had a tube tester, and I had an ohm meter, and I had all of these different electronic tools. And I knew just enough about the theory of electricity and electronics and how that machine was supposed to work that I could diagnose and repair troubles with it. And then I started to learn about quantum physics. And I realized that everything I ever knew about electronics doesn't work at the quantum level. And that's when I came to the realization. I said, oh, the only thing I know is I don't know nothing. Nothing. Don't know anything. Don't know nothing. And I couldn't help but be amazed at how we can study theories about electrons and protons and neutrons, and we can have vacuum tubes, and we can understand the theory about how they work, and we can use them to build amplifiers and receivers and all of those things. But at the quantum level, we have no idea what's going on. Now, why that's important is if you flip over to Buddhism, it says, what we want to do is try to see life as it is. See life as it is. And immediately our intellect in its arrogance says, well, I see life as it is. Of course I understand life as it is. I see these things and they are exactly the way that I see them. And they're not. You see, they're not. We look at a table and we see a table. We don't see the protons and neutrons and electrons and subatomic particles whirling around in there. We don't see that the energy is trapped in that form temporarily and will eventually be released back to energy. We don't see that part of it. Our intellect is not capable of seeing it or understanding it. So the first part about being poor in spirit is I think we have to understand, we have to accept the fact that what we get through the senses, what the intellect processes through the senses, as wonderful as it is and things we can do with it, it's not all that there is. And we want to be poor in spirit. We want to release our preconceived notions. We want to let go of everything we ever believed. We want to be willing to say everything that I ever knew might be wrong. And to start then with a Zen mind or a beginner's mind. And say, how would I know? How would I know that I know? We talked about this early in January. So to be poor in spirit, to let go of these preconceived notions, to let the divine love come to us as it will and as it must, in any way, shape, or form that it comes, you see. That is to be poor in spirit. And that is the kingdom of heaven. It comes to us. It comes to us as an experience. In other teachings, they say it comes like the thief in the night when you least expect it. It comes. It comes. So then this brings us to the second beatitude, which is, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. And it brings us to the second point, which I want to make, which is the importance of practice, the importance of a spiritual practice of stillness. What is the peace? What is the peace? Now, in our world, we kind of twist terms around, and I remember one of the earliest sidearms that Samuel Colt invented was called the peacemaker, and here it was a weapon, but it was kind of marketed as something that was going to keep the peace. So we think in our world, we think of peace as something we might have to do. We might have to send a peacekeeping force to some country, or right now we have the tensions that are going on over in the Ukraine, and we might send our troops, and we might say, well, our troops are going there to keep the peace, you see. But that's not the peace I'm talking about. It's not the cessation of hostilities or the absence of hostilities. It is the serenity that is undisturbed. This is the peace that I'm talking about. And this is the peace, as Emmett Fox tells us, that the peacemakers who shall be called the children of God. are called. So we go now to the divine mind. We have to drift in and out of our intellectual concept, and then give it up, and then move away. This is the razor's edge that we're talked about in the Hindu tradition. We're walking a razor's edge. We are using the intellect, knowing that the intellect is inadequate, that the intellect cannot go with us where we need to go. The intellect cannot go into that peace with us, because the peace that passes understanding is not an intellectual idea. It is an experience. So we come then to ask ourselves this one question. See, what does the divine mind have to be disturbed about? What does it have to be unpeaceful about? It is all power, all powerful. It is all-knowing, and it is all presence. So what could it worry about, you see? What could it be angry about? What could it be disturbed about? What could be against it, you see? And we would, I believe, have to arrive at the conclusion, nothing. Nothing. And this, of course, then makes us go back and look at all of our old understandings of scriptures when God has enemies that have to be punished and all of these kind of things. I mentioned in the book of Revelation, the symbolism that we're giving there is the throne that is surrounded by the lake as smooth as glass. The divine presence is surrounded by the lake as smooth as glass. And near that lake, there was a pit of fire and brimstone and weeping and wailing and gnashing of the teeth. And we were brought up to think that that was punishment, you see. And we want to look at it a different way that says, what has to happen as we make our approach to the experience of the presence, which is represented by that throne, the realization of the presence of God. Everything in us that is unpeaceful must go. It must leave. We must let it dissolve into the nothingness from which it came. It must go into the pit. It must be burned. So, starting with the assumption then that the divine mind is perfectly still, perfectly at ease, perfectly peaceful. And it created us out of itself. Then we must consider that we, at the very center of our being, that what we have been created from is perfect peace and perfect stillness. It is already there, you see. It is not something that we are going to get later. It is not something that is going to happen to us after we die. We're never going to be more spiritual than we are right now. We may realize more of our spiritual nature. We may experience more of our spiritual nature. But we're never going to be more spiritual than we are right now. So then we come to this aha moment that this thing that we wish to experience, it is not an intellectual experience. And it is in the stillness that we experience it. So to the degree then that the chatter of the intellect, the chatter of the monkey mind, the chatter of all of this stuff that goes on in our heads, to the degree that that settles down, that which is already there is revealed. And again, the image that we get from the east, excuse me while I get some water, is a precious gem that has been dropped into the pond. And the person looking for that puts their hand in the water and starts flailing around. And in the process, they put up ripples on the surface of the pond that reflect the sunlight so they can't see what's down below the surface. And they stir up the mud that's on the bottom and makes the water cloudy. And no amount of frenzied activity is going to let them see that which is already there. But what they must do is they must stop. They must cease. They must be patient. They must wait. The mud will settle down. The ripples will settle down. The pond will go back to its natural state of stillness. And then they will be able to see that which was always there. The prize, the gem. So the meaning of that is obvious to us in that we are desiring or seeking the experience of the presence of the divine, the kingdom of heaven. We wish to be called the children of God because we are expressing its life of peace, of stillness, of joy, and of beauty. And now we come to kind of the intellectual understanding that in order to do that, we have to leave the intellect behind. We have to experience the peace, which is not a concept. Spinoza told us, right? Peace is a way of being. And we have to come to our beingness, not our doingness, not our havingness, but our beingness. Life is busy. Our minds are busy. It is always trying to have something. It is always trying to do something. We're sitting having breakfast and our mind has gone ahead of us to work, and it's anticipating what's waiting for us when we get to work. We go out and we get in the car, and even while we're driving the car, on remote control or autopilot, the car is driving. We may be on the phone talking to people at work. We may be anticipating the things that we're going to face during the day, and we are never there in that moment. Our consciousness is always someplace else, trying to do, trying to have. And what we want to stop and consider is, who is trying to do? Who is trying to have? Who is the being that is trying to do? Who is the being that is trying to have? See, we get so absorbed in the activity that we lose our own identity. And in fact, our identity becomes confused because we think, I am the one doing this. We make that our identity. You go to a meeting and you ask somebody, to introduce themselves, and they say, well, I am the manager of this department, or I am a scientist here, I am a teacher there, I am a professor there. That's not what they are. That's what they do. You see, we confuse that. So what Buddhism tells us is that we want to experience the being, and the realization of that being is in the practice. In fact, Buddhism says without practice there can be no realization. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, what is this practice that we're talking about? Are we playing the flute? Do we have to learn how to play an instrument? What kind of practice are we talking about? And it's interesting because if you study or read about Buddhism, the adherents of Buddhism are called practitioners, because it is the practice that is important. The practice. And this practice that we are talking about today, now there are many kinds of practice, there are many different kinds of practice. We talked about spiritual mind treatment as a practice a couple of weeks ago. The practice that we're talking about today is simply the stillness of consciousness. Awareness. Awareness. When we become aware of something, we kind of go through stages. There's an awareness of it, and then eventually we get to assigning a label to it, a concept of it. Right? So I think it's called unconditioned mind and conditioned mind. Excuse me again. I'll get another sip of water. And what we're talking about today is just staying in the awareness. Just staying in the awareness. Not having the chatter go on, or if the chatter goes on, not letting the chatter distract us, but just being aware. Just being aware. Right? Not even, as we're breathing in, we talked maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago about mindfulness and breathing in and say, I am aware of in-breath, and I follow in-breath all the way through. And today I want to take it to a different place and say, just be aware. Drop the self-talk. Drop the part that says, I am aware of in-breath. Just be aware. Be aware. Just awareness. So in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there's something called the clear light consciousness or the blue light consciousness. And what they mean by that is that typically in meditation or in our experience, we are conscious of something. If we want to meditate on a rose, we're conscious of the rose. If we want to meditate on a candle, we're conscious of the candle. But there's a different level of consciousness that is just conscious of itself. It is pure awareness, aware of itself. It is pure consciousness, conscious of itself, without any external, without anything out there. Pure awareness. Now the thing is, we can't force that. See, that's the interesting part. When I first started to meditate, I thought, well, I'm going to force myself to stop thoughts. Yeah, that didn't work so well. You can't do that. Nor can you think your way to stillness, because if you're thinking about stillness, you're still thinking. You must practice stillness. You must practice peace. As Gandhi said, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. You must practice it. So there are techniques that help us to do this. And I invite you to find one or more that work for you. I'll toss out a couple today, but there are more. But I invite you to find one or more that work for you. And as part of your spiritual practice, practice stillness. Practice awareness. Practice just being aware without labeling what you are aware of. Without becoming entangled in what you are aware of. Just being, your beingness. So one time that this occurs naturally to us in the course of our lifetime is when we are startled. Like in an accident, You're driving down the road and all of a sudden somebody swerves in front of you. And you may tighten your grip on the steering wheel, you may put your foot on the brake, you may check your mirrors and find a way out of that situation, and you may steer the car away from it. But while all that's going on, at that moment that all of that is going on, you're not analyzing. You're not thinking about it. You're not talking to yourself. Okay, so now I'm going to check my mirrors and I'm going to find a way. You just do it. You see, you just do it. And the doing is an expression of your being. You are completely aware of everything that's going on at that moment. But you're not entangled in your thoughts. So you don't want to make driving down the road where there's a lot of bad drivers, you don't want to make that your spiritual practice, so that you can be startled and you can have that moment, that gap, it's called, that gap where you're just there. You see, you just stopped. But what you can do is you can use something called a stop technique. You can put remember we had the meditation bells we put on the phones for mindfulness? You can use them for another purpose, right? Whatever you're doing when that bell goes off, just go stop. Stop. And remember when we were kids, we played red light, green light, and you would just stop for a moment? Stop. And you can't anticipate it. You can't say, well, when I finish doing this, then I'm going to stop. It has to be a surprise. And when that comes up, you just stop. Just feel that gap. Just feel that gap. Just for a moment. Just for a moment to see what it feels like. Just feel that glimpse, because in that moment, in that gap, you see, that's where the stillness that already is within us can start to arise, and we can start to experience it. The Buddha said if we just meditated on the gap between our breaths, we could reach enlightenment. So we breathe in, and the in-breath stops, and then there's a gap, and then the out-breath starts. But rather than saying, oh, here's in-breath stops, oh, here's gap, oh, there's out-breath, just be aware of it. Just be aware of the gap. Go into the gap, you see. And then what happens is we start to realize that all of these, the activity of our mind, where all of these thoughts are coming and going, and what do I have to do when I get to work, and all of that, they come, they go, there's a gap. There's a gap. Be aware of that gap. Be aware of that gap. Find your place. Find your place where you can go and do this. For me, it used to be sitting at the beach, or even better, being on the deck of a boat. Sometimes we would take the fishing boats out, and they would go for a couple of hours. They would make their run out to the fishing grounds, and there's really nothing to do. You know, there's some people would go sit at the tables and play cards, and other people would chat. And I just used to like to go someplace where I could be alone and just watch the waves, just watch the ocean. And it was amazing to me, because when I first got on the boat, my mind was busy, and I had just come from the hotel and had to park the car, and did I remember the spot where I parked the car, and did I have the ticket for the boat, and did I have my fishing pole, and all of this doing this was going on. But after a couple of hours of just sitting there on the deck of the boat, watching the waves and the sun and the other boats on the horizon, my intellectual activity, the activity of mind, shifted into a different gear. It just completely slowed down. It didn't come to a halt, excuse me, but it slowed down. I was no longer entangled in that activity of mind. I started to experience peace. You can also kind of simulate the surprise with the way that you breathe out. So this comes to us from Zen as well. That one of the techniques is that we breathe in, but as we breathe out in short bursts and tighten our diaphragm. Like that. And that tightening of the diaphragm we do. That's what we do when we are in danger. Right? When you're driving that car and somebody spins out in front of you, you go like that, and you tighten your diaphragm. And that's a physiological way of bringing your thoughts momentarily to a pause, to stop. Joel Goldsmith, who wrote The Infinite Way and many other books, Joel Goldsmith was a modern mystic. And in his teaching, he said that it is the experience of the presence of God is all that matters. And that should be what we want. And he said somebody once asked him, why don't you start a university? Why don't you start an Infinite Way University where you can teach these things? And Goldsmith says there's many reasons why you don't do that. And people had a want. They had a want what he was teaching. He said he never went any place to teach unless he was invited. He says, where would you get people who would want to come to a university to practice 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 7 or 8 years, which is what he considered to be the amount of time it would take for somebody to have that shift into the beingness that we're talking about. But he did say this. He said the amount of progress that one makes on that path, on that spiritual path, is directly proportional to the amount of time that they put into what he called meditation. And I want to warn you that many people call many things meditation. But he was talking about silence. He said his students, he asked his students to meditate 5 times a day, and sometimes on a phrase such as love or God or things like that. But one of those 5 periods every day was nothing. Just sitting and being. Just the stillness. So the presence could come. The presence could reveal itself to us. And he said the amount of progress that one makes on the spiritual path is proportional to the amount of time in their practice. In Buddhism, it says the realization is in the practice. And without the practice, there is no realization. So what we want to consider today is that with all of our knowing, with all of our intellectual knowing, we really don't know much. There are many, many different denominations. There are many different books. There are many different teachers, and they all have different opinions about God. But yet, our intellect is not capable of knowing God. That is an experience. That is an experience that we have to have. The way to have the experience is through practice. And there are, as I say, there are different practices. Now I know sometimes we talk about meditation and people will say, well, I have an app on my phone and it does these guided meditations for me. And that's good. That's good as far as it goes. But that's not the kind of meditation I'm talking about. That's kind of like still keeping your intellect going. Still giving you something to listen to do. Still giving you a fantasy to participate in, walking down a path through the meadow and all those things that we do in guided meditations. And like I said, there's a time and a place for them. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about be still and know. Be still and know. So I invite you, once you recognize that God is not an intellectual exercise, God is not a problem to be solved, or the divine, or love, whichever you want to call it. It is beyond thought, but from which thought comes. It is beyond words, but from which words come. Then I think we want to look into a spiritual practice that doesn't deal with thought and doesn't deal with words. It just deals with awareness. Can we simply sit and be aware? And if we label something and we say, oh, that sounded like a cardinal to me, just go back to awareness. Don't label it. Don't analyze it. Just be aware of it. Set a timer on your phone. When it goes off, whatever you're doing, stop. Stop. If you want to work with your breath, find breath techniques similar to the one that I just gave you, which is to exhale in short bursts and to tighten your diaphragm along the way. And as you tighten your diaphragm, your monkey mind will stop for a minute. You need practice, and you need commitment to that practice. As I say, Goldsmith asks his students 5 times a day to sit and meditate. At least one for no purpose. No words. No chants. No nothing. Just sit. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Let go of your preconceived notions. Let go of all notions. Let go of words. Let go of concepts. Blessed are the peacemakers. Experience the stillness. And invite the realization of the presence of the divine. And so it is.